The rain had barely stopped when the billionaire's funeral began, gray mist curling over the cemetery like a warning. Guests in designer black whispered as the casket of Liana Whitford, the city's young billionaire heiress, was lowered into the earth. But just as the priest lifted his hand for the final blessing, a female garbage collector in a neon vest rushed forward, shaking, mud on her boots, eyes wild with terror. "She's not dead," she cried, and the rich crowd turned on her like she was trash. The crowd stiffened as the woman stood trembling beside the open grave, rainwater dripping from her cap and gloves. Her name was Marisol Vega, a garbage collector most of them had never noticed, except when they want to complain about the smell of the city. A few guests laughed under their breath. Others glared like she had just insulted the dead. One man whispered, "Who let that in here?" And a woman covered her nose as if Marisol's presence was filth. But Marisol didn't step back. She didn't run. Her voice cracked, yet her eyes stayed locked on the casket like her life depended on it. "Please, please listen," she begged. "I know what I saw." Helena's father, billionaire Charles Whitford, turned sharply, rage and grief mixing into something dangerous. "Get away from my daughter," he snapped. "This is not your place." The security guards moved forward, ready to drag Marisol off the grass like a stain. And that's when Marisol did something no one expected. She reached into the pocket of her dirty work jacket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, wrinkled and stained from being carried too long. She held it up like proof. "This was in her hand," she said. "The night I found her." The whispers stopped. Marisol explained that just 3 nights ago, she'd been working her late shift near the Riverside Park, the same park the wealthy use for charity events and morning jogs. That night, the wind was sharp and the benches were wet. She was about to toss a bag into the truck when she saw someone slumped near the fountain, hair sticking to their face like they'd been caught in a storm. At first, Marisol thought it was a drunk stranger. Then the street lamp flickered, and she recognized a face from billboards, magazines, and business news. Liana Whitford. The heiress was pale, lips slightly parted, eyes closed like she was sleeping. Marisol panicked, checked her pulse, and nearly screamed. It was so weak, so faint it felt like the tiniest ripple under skin. Marisol called an ambulance and held Liana's cold hand the entire time, refusing to let go even when the paramedics tried to shove her aside. One medic muttered about a rare medical condition, something that could slow the body down until it looked like death. Marisol didn't understand the medical words, but she understood the warning in his voice. Yet when they reached the hospital, everything changed. Doctors rushed Liana away. Marisol waited in the hallway for hours, dirty and exhausted, ignored by nurses who assumed she was nobody. Finally, a stern doctor came out and said, "We're sorry. She didn't make it." Marisol tried to speak up. She tried to tell them about the faint pulse, the medic's words, the way Liana's fingers had twitched like she was fighting to stay here. But the doctor barely looked at her, and security told her to leave. So she did. But she never forgot one thing. As the ambulance doors closed that night, Marisol felt Liana's fingers curl around hers, just once, like a silent plea. And now, standing before the grave, Marisol knew the truth. They were about to bury a living woman. The cemetery fell into a strange, heavy silence after Marisol finished speaking, like even the wind was holding its breath. Everyone stood frozen, staring at the garbage collector as if she'd just committed a crime. Her boots were sinking into the wet grass, her hands still shaking, but her voice grew steadier with every second. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to save a life. Charles Whitford clenched his jaw, struggling to breathe through his grief. His wife, Evelyn, looked like she might collapse. Her eyes were red, her face drained, her fingers clutching a black handkerchief like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. She stared at Marisol, like she wanted to believe her, but hope was dangerous when you'd already been shattered. One of the funeral guests scoffed loudly. "This is ridiculous." A man in a gold watch snapped. "She's a street worker, not a doctor." A woman beside him nodded. "She's just trying to get attention." Or money. They always do. That word, always, hit Marisol like a slap. The crowd didn't see her as a person. They saw her as a stereotype, a disposable stranger who shouldn't even be in their world. But then Marisol raised a crumpled paper higher. "I don't want money," she said, her voice trembling with anger now. "I don't want fame. I want you to stop pretending you're better than the people who keep your city running." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Security took another step toward her, but she didn't move. She stepped closer to the casket instead, eyes burning. "Liana didn't treat me like I was nothing," she whispered. She looked me in the eyes. She thanked me. She smiled at me when everyone else acted like I was invisible. Evelyn's lips parted slightly. "My daughter spoke to you?" she asked, almost stunned. Marisol nodded. She did, more than once. Her voice softened again. She used to walk her dog early in the mornings. She'd stop and ask how my day was going. Sometimes she'd bring coffee. One time she even defended me. That made the crowd shift uncomfortably. Marisol explained that a few months ago, a group of teenagers had thrown food at her while she worked. They called her disgusting. They said she was low class and worthless. Marisol had swallowed her humiliation like she always did, until a woman's voice cut to the cruelty like thunder. "Pick it up." The teens froze. It was Liana Whitford, standing there with calm fury. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She simply stared at them with such authority that their laughter died instantly. "Pick it up," she repeated. "Apologize. And learn some respect." Marisol remembered how the teenagers had scrambled to obey, their confidence turning to fear the second they realized who she was. Then Liana had turned to Marisol and said softly, "You matter. Don't let anyone make you forget that." That memory tightened Marisol's throat. She looked directly at Charles. "Your daughter was alive when I found her," she said firmly, and I felt her hand move. "I know she's not gone. Please, don't bury her, because no one bothered to listen to a garbage collector." Charles stared at her, rage melting into doubt, doubt cracking into something else, fear. "What do you want us to do?" he asked, voice shaking. Marisol swallowed. "Open the casket," she said. "Just one last time." Evelyn gasped, horrified. "No, I can't." But Marisol stepped closer, eyes pleading. "If I'm wrong, you can hate me forever," she whispered. "But if I'm right and you don't check..." The words hung in the air like a curse. Charles's hands trembled. His pride screamed at him to ignore her, to protect his reputation, to keep control. But his father's instincts, his love, overpowered everything. He turned to the priest, voice raw. "Open it." The priest hesitated, then nodded slowly. The casket lid began to lift, and Marisol's entire body went still, because in that moment she saw something no one else noticed. A tiny twitch, right beneath Liana's fingertips. The casket lid rose slowly, creaking like it didn't want to reveal what was inside. A cold breath swept through the cemetery, and every mourner leaned forward as if pulled by the same invisible force. Curiosity mixed with fear. Liana Whitford lay there in perfect stillness, her auburn hair arranged like a painting, her skin pale but peaceful. Her mother let out a broken sob and covered her mouth, already preparing for the crushing embarrassment of false hope. A man in the crowd whispered, "This is sick." Another muttered, "Someone should arrest her." But Marisol didn't hear them anymore. She stared at Liana's face, the same face that had once smiled at her like she mattered, the same face that had defended her from cruelty. Marisol's heart hammered, so hard it felt like it would crack her ribs. "Mirror," she said suddenly, voice sharp. "Please, someone bring a mirror." The priest blinked. "A mirror?" Marisol nodded quickly. "Place it under her nose. If there's even the smallest breath, you'll see it." Someone laughed nervously, but Charles Whitford's hands were trembling now. A funeral attendant rushed to a nearby car and returned with a small compact mirror. Marisol snatched it gently, like it was sacred, then stepped forward with shaking hands. She slid the mirror beneath Liana's nose. The world stopped. Seconds stretched like hours. Rainwater dripped from umbrellas. Someone sniffled. The cemetery felt so silent that Marisol could hear her own heartbeat pounding. Nothing. Evelyn Whitford let out a strangled cry. "Oh, God," she whispered, her knees wobbling. I can't do this." Charles looked like he might explode. His face. Charles looked like he might explode. His face twisted in agony. And for a second it seemed like he would scream at Marisol, blame her, destroy her for daring to reopen his grief. "Enough!" he roared, voice cracking like thunder. "This is my daughter, my child. You don't get to play games with her death." His fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white, and the security guard stepped forward again, ready to end this humiliation once and for all. But Marisol didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She only stared at the mirror as if her soul was attached to it, praying so hard it felt like her chest was tearing open. Her lips trembled. Tears slipped down her cheeks and mixed with the rain. "Please, please," she whispered again, almost to herself. "You can't leave yet, not like this." Evelyn collapsed against a relative, sobbing, unable to watch anymore. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, convinced the garbage collector had finally proven herself insane. A man muttered, "This is what happens when you let people like that get too close." Another said, "She wanted attention, that's all." Then something happened. A tiny foggy patch appeared on the corner of the mirror, so faint it looked like a smudge. Marisol froze. Her eyes widened as if she'd just seen lightning strike. "Wait," she gasped, raising the mirror higher so others could see. Look closer." Charles stepped forward slowly, his breath caught in his throat. The priest leaned in, one of the doctors in the crowd. Someone invited because of the Whitford family's power, snatched the mirror and stared hard at it. A second fog patch appeared. Then another. The doctor's face drained of color. "Oh my God," he whispered. "That's condensation." He pressed 2 fingers against Liana's wrist. Everyone watched his hand. He stayed perfectly still, counting, waiting, refusing to blink. His eyes snapped up, wide, shocked, and full of terror. "She has a pulse," he said, voice urgent. "It's extremely weak, but it's there." The cemetery exploded. Evelyn screamed. Someone dropped an umbrella. People shouted over each other, panic colliding with hope. Charles stumbled backward like the ground had vanished beneath him. "No, no," he whispered, then rushed forward, gripping the side of the casket as if he could pull his daughter back to life with sheer force. "Call an ambulance," the doctor barked. "Now. We need oxygen. CPR, standby, move." Within seconds, the cemetery turned into chaos. The funeral attendants scrambled. Security ran not to remove Marisol now, but to clear space. The priest backed away, hands shaking, whispering prayers under his breath. The crowd that had mocked Marisol moments earlier suddenly looked terrified, because they realized how close they were burying a living woman. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics pushed through the mass of people and immediately began treatment. A mask was placed over Liana's face. Her chest rose just slightly, still shallow, still fragile, but undeniably alive. Charles was crying openly now, not the controlled tears of a billionaire accustomed to power, but the desperate sobs of a father who had almost lost everything. He grabbed Marisol's arm, his grip trembling. "You," he whispered, voice breaking. "You saved her. You saved my daughter." Marisol's knees buckled, and she nearly fell, not from exhaustion, but from the rush of relief so strong it felt like her entire body had been carrying a mountain and finally dropped it. As Liana was rushed into the ambulance, Evelyn ran beside the stretcher, screaming her daughter's name, begging her to wake up. Charles followed, stumbling, still crying, still shaking. And as the ambulance doors slammed shut, Marisol stood in the muddy grass, soaked, trembling, invisible no longer. But justice wasn't finished yet, because the same people who had mocked her were now staring at her like she was something sacred. And Marisol knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. Hours later, the hospital hallway smelled of antiseptic and fear. The bright lights overhead felt cruel after the soft gray silence of the cemetery, and the sound of rushing footsteps and distant monitors made everything feel unreal, like the world had cracked open and revealed how fragile life truly was. Charles Whitford paced like a trapped animal, his expensive suit stained with mud, his hands shaking as if money had never once protected him from pain. Evelyn sat in a chair, eyes swollen and red, whispering prayers through trembling lips. And a few feet away, on a cold metal bench, Marisol Vega sat alone. No one had offered her a seat. No one had offered her water. She was still wearing the same neon vest, still drenched from rain, her boots leaving dirty puddles on the hospital floor. Nurses passed her and looked away. Some guests from the funeral stood in clusters, whispering again. Only now their tone had changed from mockery to discomfort, because they didn't know how to treat a hero who looked like a garbage collector. Charles finally stopped pacing. His eyes landed on Marisol, and something in his expression shifted. Like he was truly seeing her for the first time, not as an employee of the city, not as a background figure, but as a woman whose courage had saved his daughter from a nightmare too horrific to imagine. He walked toward her slowly. Every person in that hallway watched. Charles Whitford, the billionaire who owned half the city's skyline, stood in front of Marisol and lowered himself onto the bench beside her, not above her, not towering over her, beside her. Marisol stiffened, unsure if this was a trap, a lecture, an accusation. Her hands tightened around her cap. Charles inhaled, his voice breaking. "I owe you my daughter's life," he said. Marisol swallowed. I did what anyone should do," she whispered. Charles shook his head, tears filling his eyes again. "No," he said. "You did what most people refuse to do. You spoke when everyone told you to stay silent. You stood alone against a crowd that wanted to crush you." His shoulders slumped. "And I was one of them." Marisol's throat tightened, not with anger, but with a strange ache of being recognized after a lifetime of being unseen. Charles turned to the crowd of funeral guests who had followed him to the hospital. The same people who had sneered at Marisol's uniform. The same people who had called her desperate, dirty, attention-seeking. He raised his voice so they could all hear. "This woman saved my daughter," he said, pointing to Marisol. "Not my money, not my doctors, not my influence. Her." Silence. A man with a gold watch looked down at the floor. A woman who had covered her nose earlier shifted uncomfortably, cheeks burning. Someone tried to whisper, but Charles cut through it like a blade. "And every one of you who mocked her," he continued, voice trembling with controlled fury, "should be ashamed. You judged her by her job, her clothes, her status, and you almost helped bury my daughter because you didn't believe someone like her could be right." The instant karma hit hard. The same guests who once ruled rooms with arrogance now looked small, exposed. Their cruelty had nowhere to hide under hospital lights. One by one, they lowered their heads. Some stepped back as if they wanted to disappear. Then the doctor came out. Charles and Evelyn jumped up so fast their chairs scraped the floor. Marisol rose too, heart pounding. The doctor gave them a tired smile. "She's stable," he said. "It was a rare metabolic coma. Her vitals are weak, but she's alive. If she'd been buried, she would not have survived." Evelyn broke down sobbing, clinging to Charles. Charles covered his face, shaking, whispering, "Thank you, thank you." And then, 2 days later, Liana finally opened her eyes. Her lashes fluttered like she was waking from a long nightmare. Evelyn cried out and grabbed her hand. Charles fell to his knees beside the bed, laughing and crying at the same time. The nurses smiled. The machines beeped steadily, like a heartbeat that refused to be silenced. Liana looked around slowly, confused. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke. "Where's Marisol?" Charles froze. "You remember her?" he asked. Liana blinked, then nodded weakly. "She held my hand," she whispered. I felt it. I heard her voice. She told me not to let go." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Sweetheart, she saved you," she cried. "She stopped your funeral." Liana's eyes filled with tears. She struggled to sit up, breath shallow but determined. "Bring her to me," she said. When Marisol entered the room, still in her uniform because she come straight from work, Liana began to cry. Not delicate tears, real tears, heavy with gratitude and pain. Marisol's eyes watered too. "You're alive," she whispered, like she still couldn't believe it. Liana reached out, And Marisol took her hand carefully. "You were the only one who saw me," Liana said softly. "When everyone else treated you like you were invisible, you still showed up for me." Charles stepped forward, voice full of humility. "Marisol, I can never repay you," he said, "but I can honor you." The next week, the Whitford Foundation announced a new citywide initiative: fair wages for sanitation workers, healthcare coverage, and community programs, built and led by Marisol herself. Not as charity, as justice, as respect. Marisol didn't become a hero because she was rich or powerful. She became a hero because she was brave. And the city learned something it should have known all along. Respect isn't earned by money. It's earned by humanity.